towards Seguin, I think.
Yeah, well,
Can't think of the name of it.
we'll find out, but I can tell you this, a metal box in Texas without air is
A metal block.
Mailbox with windows.
yeah, with no air. There is no
I think
breeze.
that's called a hothouse.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, it does. I walked out, because I was sitting there working on it, going through all the possible things it could be, and then you're like, you go outside, it's like, wow, it feels great out here. Yeah, so, all right, you ready?
We have 5 minutes yet.
Well,
What
we
if
can always,
somebody else
we can
came?
leave 5 minutes early,
There's
so.
one other person comes sometimes.
Well, I think we could go ahead.
I think we're all right.
If you wanna run the risk.
Nobody else is
fine.
gonna be joining us probably, so.
All right, schedule-wise, I didn't realize this, but so the next 2 weeks, there will be a virtual class, not here.
Right.
Virtual, yeah. And it's asynchronous, meaning I will post a video, you can watch it whenever. I plan on doing these on Tuesday. That's what I plan on doing. But we'll figure it out. So I know next week's Father's Day. Happy Father's Day.
You too?
Yeah.
So are you guys taking off in your RV again?
So we were all going to go to Ohio. Melody and the kids are going to Ohio. She didn't want to drive, so I'm going somewhere else with 3 dogs. So and 27th. We're going places. Our schedule's sort of fun. I think we've got. San Antonio trip, Report A trip. We're going to Fredericksburg for 2 days.
I'm just being nosy.
It's really cool because this little club, you park in the vineyards. You just park in the vineyard, and yeah, I think I told you that last week. But then we're going to Galveston.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, that's why you
Cool.
might as well use
Really
it.
spreading your wings, aren't you?
Well, we're staying in Texas.
Galveston, Fredericksburg.
Hey, anyway, so no class on Independence Day, and as I was sitting there looking at everything that's going to go out on the street outside, that's probably a good thing, because if they're redoing Loman's Ford, we don't want, we'd be leaving here in the
Well,
middle.
they're starting that tonight.
They're starting that tonight at 7. Yeah, so we'll see.
Well, you know that you can get around that pretty easily.
Not from here.
Are they gonna
Yes,
have all
you
the
can.
lanes blocked?
No, they're gonna have different ones
Yeah.
closed, but if you don't wanna mess with it, yes it is, you just go down Dawn to the, square, the circle.
Circle
and
and take a right.
Take a right, and you come out,
The
you
bottom,
do
That-
it
on Parquet.
on Barcade.
Yeah,
turn right.
that is true. Yeah, okay, you're right. I'm just thinking of, yeah.
And if you gotta go the other way, you can,
Oh, you can go down Dawn and zip all around there. So, okay. One of the things I didn't do last week, so that's, everybody get the schedule, 2 weeks
I
of
guess I won't see you after tonight until August 1st.
August. Oh, are you going in July?
Well, I don't do the virtual stuff that well, so I don't imagine I'll be doing those. Plus, there's no class on the 4th, the 11th, and 18th will be in Wisconsin.
Ah.
And the 25th is another virtual.
Yep. All right. Well, it'll be great. One of the things I didn't didn't do last time is, and you were asking about it, these 4 books are 4 series of radio talks. Each chapter was think of it as an episode, a single thing. And, I thought it would, for me it was interesting just to put this up, just to see, because we're finishing book 1 tonight, which was really this idea of the natural law. He's not really talking about God yet. He sort of sneaks it in here in the last couple of chapters, but his whole idea is, it's like if you're an alcoholic, I'll use this as an example, the first thing you have to realize is, oh, I have a problem. And so this whole book 1 is really, oh, I have a problem. And it's a sort of sin problem type.
But he very cleverly does talk about God by not talking about it.
Yes, he makes you come to your own conclusion, which is what he's trying to do.
Well, and we read between the lines. And
Yes.
probably inject God.
Oh, yeah.
Everything he probably wanted to, but wasn't gonna throw it in anyone's face yet.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so what happens is we start to go into, what do Christians believe, Christian behavior, which is almost an ethics class. And then I don't know why, it'll be interesting, but why do we go to the doctrine of the Trinity? He starts to get into the, doctrine a little bit in the last one. It's very strange, but
Well, the first part of that, though, beyond personality, I don't quite understand that.
we'll see there when we get there. Yeah. So, all right. Tonight.
okay, so you're not gonna answer the question, then?
Nah, we'll get there when we get there. So tonight we're really wrapping up this first set of talks. What's interesting, and I have the numbers wrong. It's 3, 4, 5, not 2, 3, 4, but that's all right. I'm telling you what, chapter 3, which was the reality of the law, which was him going through the tree and the rock. I don't know if you remember. I'm sitting there. I'm sorry. I read it. I listened to it. I read it. I listened to it again. I read it again. I listened to it again. I don't know why it's there. Because you're sitting there going, I know you're trying to make a point here. That basically, I think the point he was trying to make in that chapter was, nature, a tree acts like a tree, and a rock acts like a rock, but we act like humans, and we're different than trees and rocks. Okay, that's the best I could get out of it.
Well, I'm not sure.
Anybody else get anything more out of that chapter?
Well, I thought he was trying to differentiate between the two types of natural law.
Yes.
The one that is scientific based, that a rock weighs X amount of pounds and falls because of gravity, and all you gotta do is try it a few times, and every time it'll do the same thing, versus human natural law, which involves unpredictability, among other things, because people don't follow that law.
And maybe what he was trying to do, and I'll agree with you, maybe what he was trying to do is really set up the next chapter, which was basically, from a science standpoint, which we will dig into after the video, science can't observe a desired behavior that we feel. And, so if we get to his point, and I'll go to this slide, that the first point he wanted to make was that humans have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way. Science cannot observe that thought that we ought to, or that idea. And I think that's what he was trying to get with the tree and the rock.
Because you've got that nature nurture, that nobody can really answer that question. Which is more important? Because both have something to do with the way, who we become.
Sure.
Depending on the family we were raised in. And, he says on page 20 at the end of chapter 3, men ought to be unselfish, but men aren't unselfish.
Yeah.
And I think that was the point of this whole chapter, was
Yeah.
that, especially us Christians,
Well,
should know how to love one another, and yet we don't.
I got the impression what he was trying to say was that laws of nature, natural laws, from a science standpoint, mean that things like rocks or stones and trees don't have the ability to analyze themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas under the human natural law, we have the ability, whether we use it or not, or do anything with it or not, a whole nother discussion, but to be able to analyze why we're here, what's the meaning of things. A stone doesn't do that.
Right. Well, and a tiger or a lion in the Sahara, whatever, Africa, feels no remorse by going and eating a antelope. All right, because
Or even if they cross the
well,
path.
that's true because that's
Hungry.
food. Yeah, that's what they do. So there's no no remorse. There's no, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Where if we as humans murder somebody, even if it's an accidental, say you're and you run over somebody in your car, there's still this guilt, remorse because we know that's wrong to kill, even if it's an accident.
He says on page 17, and this is, I think, what I was trying to say, is the law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them, semicolon. But the law of human nature tells you what human beings ought to do and do not.
Yep. And that's the 2 points. And because I'll reiterate these 2 points because we'll end on these 2 points because these are the 2 points he was trying to make in this first set of episodes, which is, hey, we have this idea of what is right and wrong, yet we can't behave that way. No matter how hard we try, we still break the things that we feel that we ought to do. Paul said it, I don't do what I want to do, and I do what I don't want to do. So you got this conflict, which is basically the sin nature. It's very intriguing. So just as a quick review, natural law is that ethical or moral standard that God has revealed through creation. And we went through some of the verses last week, and he's not talking about God yet, but we get those verses in the Bible. And then this idea of a social covenant or convention is really social norms. So humans make social norms, all right? And they can evolve, they're sort of the unwritten customs. Do you shake hands? Do you kiss when you see somebody? Do you fist pump? Or in the age of Corona, do you just go, whoa, how's it going? I mean, so that social covenant or that unwritten social norm that can change from culture to culture. So the one line that I think is the best out of these 3 chapters. And I think in one of the, it might have been in the first video, this idea of going back is the quickest way on. And it's this idea that if we're going in a wrong direction, meaning if the natural law that we have in us is telling us this is the way you as a human are supposed to behave. This is what God wants from you from a behavior standpoint. Well, the quickest way to fix that is to realize that you're going in the wrong direction. All right? And he uses the math equation, of basically, when I'm doing math, there's one way to do it, all right, to get to the right answer. And as soon as I realize that I'm doing the equation wrong and go back, that's the quickest way to get to the right answer.
That all makes sense if you know that. The bigger problem is knowing that you've made an error in the first place, and that sometimes can drag on for quite a while.
Sure.
Look at Moses. He was in the desert for 40 years because he wouldn't ask for directions.
Yep.
He didn't ask anybody.
Oh, just going to leave a lot of things laying out there. Just going to leave it all out there. But I wish I could, draw this out, because I have this picture in my mind that if you look at the whole story of the Bible is basically God trying to get us back together. If you remember that gap the redemption, the salvation history is basically, here we are in the Garden of Eden, humans, his creation, and him with his spiritual creation are all together. And then sin happened, and we started going away. All right, humans. And we kept going away. And we keep going away. All right? And God's like, no, no, no. He's coming and trying to grab us and say, no, come back. All right? This is the going back to God is the quickest way to go on.
So the story is about the Israelites or Hebrews and how often they took a wrong turning.
Oh, yeah.
And it took them sometimes a long time to figure that out. But eventually prophets or others came along and
Well, it's like the whole book of Judges. Close to God, close to God, close to God. I go away from God. I go away from God. I go away from God. I come back. It's nothing new. It's nothing new.
So this is on page 29.
Yeah. I think it's
well, and that's obviously an English saying to have taken a wrong turning.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, this is sort of like a little bit closer to King James language. So.
Can I remember Pete what she said, and then she ended up with page 29.
Page 29, the 5th chapter of the first, and it's the end of the first
That's
paragraph.
where this is.
That's where
this is.
Got it, yes, I see it. Going back is, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not going to read that whole thing because, yeah. All right, are you ready? I got to tell you, this.
You just gave it to us in a nutshell.
Yeah. I had to look this up. I was reading. It was from Heiser's class, and there's a word or a phrase, and it must be Latin. In nunca, N-U-N-C, I think it was. Don't quote me on that. And I had to look it up because I didn't know what it meant, and it means in a nutshell. So it's like, I could pull it up, but I'm not. All right, are you ready for the video? This video I don't like as much because, well, it's pretty good. Now, I wish I could. I don't understand why the lips don't sync up.
Oh, I know it.
Oh, that's with
Yeah. Well. So what happens is in the PowerPoint presentation, I embed the video, and the lips aren't syncing up when it's showing here. But then when I show the video, it syncs up fine. But then the video is too small for the TV. So if it bothers you, just don't watch. Yeah, when his mouth is going. But I apologize, I can't figure it out. So here we go.
He looks like Charles Perrault.
Although it was quite clear from the start that Lewis would one day become a writer, it was far from clear that he would one day become a Christian. He'd been an atheist, a serious one, for most of his early life. One of the reasons the BBC asked him to give the series of radio talks that became Mere Christianity was because, as Lewis put it, he still remembered what Christianity looked like from the outside to people who were not Christians. When he was 17, Lewis summarized his religious views in a letter to Arthur Greaves, a friend he'd known since childhood.
I believe in no religion. There is absolutely no proof for any of them. And from a philosophical standpoint, Christianity is not even the best.
15 years later, he would write to Arthur expressing a very different conviction.
Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things, namely the actual incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection.
Lewis's great change did not include a dramatic Damascus Road experience. It took Lewis all of that 15 years and a great deal of truthful self-reflection and careful thinking to change his mind. In 1917, when Lewis arrived here in Oxford, he was a student who believed in no religion. The college he attended was largely agnostic or atheistic, and so the young Lewis fit in well with the post-Christian, even anti-Christian atmosphere. This is the quad of University College, or UNIV as it's called. Right up there someplace is where an 18-year-old named Clive Staples Lewis lived when he was a student here. Years later, after his books were widely read on both sides of the Atlantic, Lewis began receiving requests to recount the story of his spiritual journey. People wanted to know how he'd gone from being a committed skeptic to a committed Christian. In response to these appeals, he wrote Surprised by Joy, the story of his life up to his conversion. Now, the title, Surprised by Joy, came from Lewis's own description of the mysterious longing he experienced for something more than he was. Even as an atheist, he felt an unsatisfied desire that was more desirable, as he put it, than any satisfaction. Lewis called this strange desire joy, always spelled with a capital J. This special feeling of joy would come and go sporadically. At times he felt it consistently, other times it would disappear for long periods. But when it did come, its presence was always fleeting, yet these momentary experiences always left him with a sense of something wonderful that lay just beyond his grasp. As a serious atheist, Lewis was not surprised by the joy he experienced, he was shocked by it. It made no sense to him that if, as he believed, there was nothing beyond nature, nothing beyond what he could see, touch, taste, and smell, then where did this longing come from? And why did it seem that nothing in this world could satisfy it?
Nearly all I loved I believed to be imagery. Nearly all that I believed to be real I thought grim and meaningless. I was, at this time, living like so many atheists, in a whirl of contradictions.
A thoroughgoing theist who felt an unearthly longing, this paradox would lead Lewis to ask serious questions about what he thought was real and what he took to be imaginary, and to look for serious answers. In this session, we'll explore what Lewis found when he, as a thoroughgoing atheist, asked the question, what lies behind the law of nature, behind the sense of right and wrong that we all share?
C.S. Lewis recognized that we lived in a world full of contingencies. If you see a toddler, you could presuppose that somewhere there were parents that produced that child. If you see a building, you can understand that there were architects and contractors and laborers who built the building. All of those things are contingent upon other things that were there prior. Lewis recognized then that in this universe, there must be something that's outside of the processes of contingencies, something that is necessary and eternal. But what would that be? And in Mere Christianity, Lewis deduces that there are at least two different approaches to this. One is a materialist approach, and the other is what he calls a religious approach or supernatural approach. The materialist approach believes that matter is eternal. It's always been there. It's something all of us were taught even in middle school. Matter is neither created nor destroyed, and we were fed at that time a particular worldview. But if in fact matter is eternal, the question comes, well, where do ideas come from? Where does justice come from? Where does a sense of love come from? You've never had a meaningful discussion with a rock. But the materialist says, oh, no, we can explain it all. The lovers don't really love each other. The man looks at a woman. Her image is projected on the retina of his eye through a series of electrical synapses. It travels along the optic nerve, stimulates the brain, causes secretion of particular hormones. And he says it's love, but the materialist says, no, it's not love. It's just matter, just chemistry. The problem is Lewis had bought that view when he was an atheist. It was a worldview that supported him in his atheism. But one day he saw the inherent contradiction. For you see, the materialist looks at the lovers and they project an image on his retina. A message travels along his optic nerve and stimulates his brain and causes secretion of particular hormones, and he calls it explanation. But he wants you to believe his explanation is valid even though the lovers can't really say love. And Lewis, in seeing the contradiction, came to the conclusion, he writes about it in Miracles, that I do not believe reason is mere cerebral biochemistry. And he rejected the materialist view. By contrast, there was the religious or supernaturalist view, that in fact the things that we see that are contingent in this world had their source from something that was not material, was ultimately immaterial, that is, was from God. Now, the scientists, Lewis understands, can tell us some things about this material world, but they have limitations. While the scientists can give us many good insights, there are some things they can't really talk about in a substantive way. John Polkinghorne, the Cambridge physicist, once said, if you ask the scientists, why is the kettle boiling? The scientists will give you an answer, and it will be heat from the burner is agitating the molecules of the water and causing the kettle to boil at 212 degrees at sea level. But Polkinghorne said, you could also say the kettle's boiling because I wanted a pot of tea, and would you like a cup of tea also? Now that second answer is equally valid, but it's not an answer the scientists could get you to because they work with the quantifiable. They work with the measurable. And our world is far more complex, and that can be reduced merely to the quantifiable and measurable. Years ago, I had an astrophysicist tell me that she lived by the principle, if she couldn't perceive it empirically, she just didn't believe it. And I said to her, well, could you set that principle forth for me empirically? And of course she couldn't. And in the moment that she had to admit that she couldn't, she saw the contradiction in her own principle. She had been an atheist, but after our conversation, she became an agnostic because she saw the problem. Lewis also saw the problem. Now, he believed that we can know, but the way that we know is interesting, and especially about religious truth. Ultimately, it comes from authority or revelation. As a matter of fact, before Lewis was a Christian, he was thinking about these matters, and he's reasoned his way through atheism and supporting materialism, agnosticism, and finally he becomes a theist. But at that point in his life, and surprised by joy, his autobiography, he said he didn't think he could know God personally any more than Hamlet could know Shakespeare. A year and a half later, C.S. Lewis became a Christian. And he realized that his image of Hamlet and Shakespeare was in fact a good one. For you see, Hamlet, the character of the play, could never break out of the play to get to know the author, Shakespeare. But in fact, Shakespeare, the author, could have written himself into the play as Shakespeare, the character, and made the introduction possible. And Lewis said, that's what I believe happened in the Incarnation. When God wrote himself into the play of human experience and made himself known to us through his Son. Now, Lewis said we also have insider information. All of us have a sense of morality. We all sense what is fair play. We may not always see when we violate that, but if somebody around us violates it, we're quick to point it out right away. And if somebody accuses us of violating it, we're quick to make excuses and rationalizations for these things. Now, as Lewis writes about this, we see that he writes about it with great humility. Lewis isn't quick to point out the sins and shortcomings of others, but he does believe that if we're going to deal honestly with life, we have to deal with these shortcomings. And Lewis says one of the best ways to get people to do it is just to be honest about it ourselves. I suppose I could put it in context by telling a story. Years ago, I was asked to give an evensong service at Hartford College at Oxford University. The chaplain, a friend, invited me to sit at high table with the faculty after the meal was over. High table at Oxford University is fabulous. If you've ever seen the Harry Potter movies, the hall where they have their meals is the hall at Christ Church, one of the Oxford University halls. It's the most spectacular, of course. Hartford's not quite as grand, but it's not bad. Long tables run the length of the hall. Perpendicular to them and elevated about 2 or 3 steps is the high table where the faculty sit. If the students are eating roast beef, the faculty are eating prime rib. If the students are eating steak, the faculty are eating filet mignon. Everybody eats the high table meal in their academic gowns. The meal begins with a Latin prayer. The wine flows freely, and you could cut the pretense with a knife. It's not so bad if you don't take yourself too seriously, but in that environment, many people take themselves far too seriously. The chaplain introduced me as having spoken the evensong service, a Latin prayer. We all sit down. The woman who taught history there was sitting across from me, and she said, "So Jerry, why are you a Christian?" I thought she was asking because she wanted to know. But this insider information must keep us engaged honestly with the material. And I looked at her and I said, I'm a Christian because I'm aware of failure in my life. I'm aware of incongruity. I believe in the high ideal of love. There are these deep convictions that we all have within. I believe in the high ideal of love, but I've had sharp words with people I say I love most in the world. I believe in justice, I said. But there have been times I've been unfair in my treatment of others. I didn't set out to be unfair, but I realize in retrospect I had been. And I don't think I could make it in life, I said to this woman, if I didn't know there was such a thing called forgiveness. Who has ever lived one moment of honest life without the realization that we need to be forgiven? And also I said I became a Christian because I was overwhelmed by the message of God's love, which is an unconditional love, freely given. It's ontological. That means it can't be improved by my well-doing, nor diminished by my poor-doing. So consequently, I said that love that is freely given makes it possible not only for me to come to God for forgiveness, but also out of that love to go and ask forgiveness of the people I might have hurt. And I said, that's why I'm a Christian. The woman was taken back by that answer. She said, well, I can appreciate that, but that's just not my issue. I said, I think I understand what you're saying. I didn't become a Christian till I was in my first year of university. And I said, but I didn't become perfect overnight. That took 2 or 3 weeks before that happened. And as soon as I said that, the entire high table of all the faculty busted up in gut-wrenching laughter. When the laughter subsided, I looked at the woman and I said, your laughter just betrayed you. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you and I just met, so you don't know the specifics in my life that made that statement that I'd achieved perfection nonsense. But either your read of history or your read of your own life has told you that nobody has it together. And so consequently, this brokenness, this insider information keeps us mindful of the fact that we need more. And I said, in knowing what you know about yourself, what gets you by? She says, I have faith in humanity. I said, I'm interested in anything that's going to help me, but let me ask you about your faith in humanity. Have you ever been wounded by another human being before? She said, of course. I said, have you ever wounded another human being before? She said, I suppose so. She was a little softer on herself. I said, given the fact that we live in such a broken world, how does this faith in humanity work then? And just then, the man sitting next to her who taught French there said, how does it work for Christians? And we spent the rest of the dinner engaging in the themes of the grace of God and the forgiveness of God and the love of God, the very kinds of themes that Lewis, building his speculation about natural law, then develops throughout the rest of Mere Christianity. So what does this all mean for us? Lewis's interest in the natural law and how it drove him to faith. I would suggest to you, for Lewis, it brought him to the place of humility, where he realized that he couldn't live up to the standards that he had set for himself, but he also realized that there was a God of grace who made available forgiveness, who loved him in spite of what he did or didn't do, And consequently, that love gave him the freedom to fail, which is the freedom to grow. And also, I would suggest to you, there was a humility that came to him, a gratitude that came to him, a magnanimity that came to him, whereby the generosity he had received from God, he was willing to extend to others in his world. And it becomes quite a model for us.
After graduating from Oxford, the young Jack Lewis stayed on at the world's most prestigious university, not as a student, but now as a don, a tutor. On June 25th, 1925, he was formally admitted as a fellow here at Magdalen College, named after Mary Magdalene, but keeping its Middle English pronunciation of Magdalen. Lewis was 26. It is a formidable ceremony, he wrote to his father, and not entirely to my taste. Being one of the largest of the colleges at Oxford, Magdalen had a sizable faculty. As part of the admissions ritual, Jack was required to stand in front of them all while the college vice president addressed him for 5 minutes in Latin. At the end of this exhortation, Lewis was required to kneel on a red cushion which had been especially provided for the event. That done, the vice president took Jack by the hand and raised him to his feet with the words, "I wish you joy." Jack tripped a little on his gown while rising, but he took consolation that at least the ceremony was over, or so he thought. Instead, he was sent around the room where each of the fellow dons shook his hand and repeated the same phrase, "I wish you joy." What Jack could not have foreseen was how soon this wish would come true, albeit in a way he never could have expected. Lewis became friends with a wide variety of the faculty. Many were believers, including J.R.R. Tolkien. Lewis intended to influence them with his skepticism, but to his surprise, they began to influence him. Through these friends, Lewis came to see Christianity as intellectually credible, and despite his great desire to be left alone by God, if God existed, a great change took place in him. Understanding that we all have a sense of right and wrong, and that there must be something or someone real behind this universal experience was a pivotal first step for Lewis. It would not be his last. In our next session, we'll explore Christianity's shocking alternative explanation for the universe and our place in it.
So I know who Eric is. Who was the second gentleman who did a whole bunch of that?
Hold on a second, because I have his name.
Gerald something, or
Jerry,
Jerome.
I think it's Jerry Root. Hold on a second here.
Is he in the book?
No, he's in the study guide for the.
And was Jack a nickname for
Yeah.
Lewis? Okay.
I was gonna say, yeah, Jack, and see, where did this is Jack come from, but
Yeah, Jack is
Clive
Jack is what he C.S. Lewis was. That was like his little
Well, his first name was Clive.
Clive. Yeah, I mean he didn't want to go by his first and middle name. Trust me. Jerry Root. I don't know who Jerry Root is.
okay.
Seems to hold a high degree of respect.
Oh yeah. Well, there's two illustrations that he. Well, one illustration that he used, and then part of his conversation with this lady on the, and I'm listening to him talk about, the Harry Potter and how the faculty were up on the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I know, I mean, if you've seen the Harry Potter movies, you see how that is, and you're like, oh yeah. But the illustration that he used about basically Shakespeare writing himself into the play so that he could introduce himself to Hamlet. That's just an amazing illustration, and as I'm watching that again for like the 100th time, you guys know the Marvel movies.
I know of them.
Okay,
I know of them.
okay. Stan,
Comic book.
yeah,
comic.
Stan Lee is the creator of those, and in every movie and in every TV show when he was alive, he would make a cameo appearance in the movie.
Oh, like Hitchcock.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I'm watching Phase 1 again, and we're going down Marvel stuff, and that's okay. But the Avengers Phase 1, Agent Carter is a TV show that's sort of the second in line, and he's Stan Lee, the author, is sitting there on the old shoe shine thing, and he's sitting there talking to one of the characters. Well, what an illustration. That's what God did. He wrote himself into the drama of his creation so that we could know him. Because it's true, we could never know him. We could sense him. We could have a feeling that we were missing something, all that kind of stuff. But unless he introduced himself into the creation, we wouldn't know. We'd have hints, and we'd probably make up stuff, to fill that hole. We'd make them a mythology around it, which cultures have done. But unless Jesus came into the drama, we wouldn't know. And that's such a great illustration. And then I love why are you a Christian? And it's just like, I'm a Christian because I know who I am. And I can't do what I want to do. I'm putting that into my words, but that was a great sort of line.
Well, the thing that's always, I guess, been something that I've thought about a lot over the years, but that can't be explained by this materialist view is, how did it get here? And
Yep.
the Big Bang Theory, I think I heard it said one time that the religious approach to how everything got here makes far more sense and is far more plausible than the materialistic side with the Big Bang Theory and all these
Well, you gotta.
chemicals and things coming together at just the right time and just
Oh,
the right
well,
place.
remember this: the Big Bang Theory was developed by a Catholic priest. Okay, if you go back to the origin of the Big Bang Theory, the Big Bang Theory is not necessarily bad if you think of it as God. That's what God did.
But that's not how it's presented.
That's not how it's presented. No, absolutely not.
That's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And so to me, when I look outside, every morning, look out and see the hillside and all of that, how can you not
Yep.
imagine that some supreme being that we call God, how else did that happen?
Oh yeah. So he basically does this materialistic view, the religious view, and then he throws in basically the middle view that at the end, note, I didn't do this in the thing, but I got to put this in here. Well, the view in the middle, I'm not really going to go over.
The life force?
Yeah, because basically what it is it's religious people that basically don't want to offend science or seem stupid, so they come to this middle theistic evolution, is what we call it
But
today.
they are really religiously
Yeah.
centered.
Yes.
And as he points out, it's the only conclusion you can come to.
Yeah. So, let's look at this, because I remember doing this, gosh, it must have been 8 years ago. We did a little bit of an apologetics class in the men's group, and I had to go back to my old stuff because this came from there. But the materialism is a philosophical system which regards matter as the only reality in the world, which undertakes to explain every event in the universe as resulting from the condition and the activity of matter. So they're basically worshiping matter. Now, if you look, and I don't have this, if you look at all the things that happen on this earth that have to continue to act on this earth in order for us to be here, to sit there and say that it just happened is just completely unreasonable. I mean, we are just far enough away from the sun that we don't burn up. But yet we're close enough to the sun that we get all of the energy from.
Yeah.
The heaven, if you call it the second heaven, which is basically that little or the thin layer of the atmosphere that keeps us from basically burning up
Or freezing.
or freezing to death, that has to be there. The tilt of the earth, this rotation of the earth. I mean, you could keep going on. All these things are like this perfect clockwork that has not changed, or from a standpoint of making it so that we could live here. You want to say that's chance? You're out of your mind. It takes more faith to say that is chance than it does to say, you know what, God created this.
Well, but, I forgot, it's in the, I forget the verse in the Bible, but it talks about, it's in Romans, I believe, about not worshiping the creature, but rather the creator.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what gets lost with materialism is,
And that's just exactly what I was thinking. We worship the creation, not the creator. All the
Or-
different,
or the
the
creature.
creation is
Yeah.
Yeah.
every single thing that we
Yeah.
see around us, including we worship all of that versus who created us in the first place.
Now, he talks about the religious view, which I like the way he says it. There's a mind out there that did all this, and it's unlike any other mind that we had. And I sort of like that thought of there's some, you can call it intelligent design, but I don't really even want to go there. Something created this universe for a purpose. And we are that purpose, Now, here's the thing. And now we're going to go into a bit of a little science lesson, a very little of a science lesson. Can science prove or disprove either one of them? Either one of those views?
I think it proves that God exists rather than.
Well, it leads you to that. But let me just go here. What's science? I love today where, okay, I'm going to go down just a little trail, but I'll come back quickly. You got all the division about, well, who's following science with all the COVID thing? Well, you sit there and go, what is science? You're using this word, science. Well, science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Science is a method of proving things, all right? And I actually pulled this out from Encyclopedia Britannica or Wikipedia, however you want to look at it. And it basically talks about what is the scientific method. Because when we start to look at what the word science is and what the process of science is, we're going to come back to that question. So the first thing of the method of science is, hey, we got to collect information and make observations so that we can ask a question. The asking of the question is forming a hypothesis. Then we design an experiment to test the hypothesis. All right? We conduct that experiment, we compare, we see what's going on, we draw a conclusion. Did the hypothesis work? Did it not work? We write a report on it, and then we conduct more experiments. Pretty cool, huh? Mm-hmm. All right? It's a way that you can observe and make experiments and ask questions to prove if your questions from what you observed are right or wrong. Okay? So, we get this, what's a scientific law and what's a scientific theory? Well, a law of science, they're statements based on repeated experiments or observations that describe or predict a range of natural phenomena. Science is trying to explain what's going on. That's your law. A theory is an explanation of the aspect of the natural world. Okay. Wow. They sound exactly the same, right? Not really. So a theory explains why a phenomena occurs. All right. A law just describes the phenomena and how it happens. Okay, so, and I'll read this, and it's a little different wording, but a scientific theory differs from a scientific fact or scientific law in that a theory explains why or how. A fact is a simple basic observation, where a law is a statement, often an equation explained mathematically about a relationship between facts. Example, Newton's law of gravity is a mathematical equation that can be used to predict the okay, my iPad just started talking, no big deal. So you get this idea. It explains what's going to happen, but not how it works. Okay? Now, I'm going to add on a little bit more here. This is controversial. So, two kinds of general science when it comes to the method of science. Operational or observational science, and then historical or origin science. Ooh, what does this mean? Okay, when we talk about the created world, you can't observe that. So you have to use historical science at that point, okay?
Well, we can observe up to a certain point.
Yeah,
The
but
created
you
world.
cannot create a world again. You cannot do an experiment.
Okay, well, you said you can't,
You can't observe.
You can't
yeah,
observe
because
the
we can't
creation.
observe
You can't observe the creation of the world,
up to a certain point.
right?
Are you talking about we can't observe the actual
You can't.
creation
Correct.
that God went through?
Not one living soul in the history of mankind
Okay,
has made something out of nothing.
right. Got it.
So we'll give you this. So the distinction is explained as observational science being science that is repeatable and verifiable, and thus falsibility with the senses.
Falsifiable.
Thank you. Falsifiable with the senses. This type of science is what takes place today. It can be empirically tested, thus can be known. Okay? That's if you can observe it and then you can do an experiment that repeats it, you know it.
That's my calculus.
Yes.
I took calculus in college, well, years ago, long after I finished high school. But one of the teachers said, okay, walk up to as far as you can go to the wall. And of course, my foot's touching the wall, both feet. He says, can you go any further? I said, well, obviously not, or I'd be walking through the wall. Well, that's not true in calculus, because calculus will show you that there's steps after that, and more steps after that, and more steps after that. We just aren't aware of that.
Historical science, and keep that thought. Historical science, on the other hand, is an investigation of the past. The past is something that is not repeatable or verifiable with the sense, thus it cannot be, thank you. Since it cannot be empirically tested, it cannot be known.
For certainty.
For certainty. So here you get this idea. Everybody's sitting there going, well, science says this. Okay, science is great, all right? Because if you look at the early stages of science, scientists were religious. They were Christian, or they were God-fearing in some fashion or not, and they were trying to prove the Bible. Okay? from a observational standpoint. They wanted to test it, okay? Well, now we get science trying to disprove everything and saying that science has disproved the Bible. No, because especially when you get into creation, so what experiment are you doing to observe something from nothing? Okay? Or in this case, what experiment can you do about the embedded, however you want to say it, feeling you have of right and wrong that has been ingrained in your soul? Go ahead, do an experiment. Try to figure it out.
Well, and then like the old joke, and I probably won't get it right, but about the guy that says he can create a man from dust also, and God says, go get your own dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So the question then comes to this, because you're going to get binged with like 3 questions right in a row. So he claimed, Jerry Root, whoever Jerry Root is, and I should have looked it up, I don't know who he is. He claims that the world, you can look it up, the world is far too complex to be reduced merely to the quantifiable and measurable. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, a lot of our world is supernatural. I mean, so I don't know that you can really measure all of the supernatural
Ooh,
part of our.
so there's a tough one, because we know that because we have faith in God and we've read the book, and the book talks about basically a supernatural world, okay? But people that don't believe in the Bible, would they know or even agree that there's a supernatural world?
And that's the question. You're asking a question.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's sort of, it's like, that's a tough one because, like, we know, we have a sense because we believe that there, and because we've read it in the Bible, which is God's words to us, that there is a supernatural world. I would say that a secular non-believer would sit there and they're the ones going crazy about UFOs, and basically it's interesting, they love doing the movies, the entertainment of ghosts and Stranger Things, other worlds, other things going on. Why do they love that so much? Because they have an innate understanding of it, but they don't equate that to God.
Well, and so it's also different when you see a movie versus when it comes almost in your face.
Oh, sure. Sure.
The reality of that is such that you either believe or you don't believe.
Yeah.
Here's Jerry Root. He's an assistant professor of evangelism and an associate director of the Institute for Strategic Evangelism, Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois.
Okay.
He's also an author. It appears he's done a great deal of study on C.S. Lewis. There's 4, 5 different books he's written about C.S. Lewis. The first one listed is The Neglected C.S. Lewis. The other one is Splendor in the Dark, C.S. Lewis's others in his life and works. The Surprising Imagination of C.S. Lewis, The Quotable Lewis.
I think he likes C.S. Lewis.
Evil.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
So he's obviously done a great deal of work around C.S. Lewis, but...
So let's get back to this question. Is the world too complex to be quantifiable?
Is it too complex to be quantifiable?
Should we just
reduced merely to quantifiable and measurable? I would say yes, it is way too complex for that. It may be a starting point, but I don't think it tells everything there is.
But I think here's the danger, and I'm going to say Yeah, it is way too complex. But God gave us another part of that natural law is we have a natural curiosity to figure out how things work. So I think that God put that into us to try to figure out as much as we can figure out. But it comes down to, at the end of the day, you still got to have faith. You know what I mean? So your desire is to figure out things. Your desire is to create things.
Man is extremely complex.
Oh,
When I went to the ENT, the specialist at Temple, Scott and White, who ended up doing my surgery, he said, there's so much that we don't know.
Oh.
Just talking about the little inner ear, this teeny tiny little thing. And he's been on top of his specialty for years. And yet, there's no explaining why, for example, I have many ears, why all of this happened to me versus someone else.
Mhm.
It just happened, and he can't explain it. But he does like to dance on the hall after surgery is successful, and he's a believer, so that's good enough for me. But I'm just saying, our bodies are extremely complex, and we could study and study to the ends of the world, and God's only going to show us what He wants to show us in regards to any certain thing.
well, think about this, and I'll let you talk here in a second. DNA is a relatively new understanding, and we know nothing about it. I mean, when in the grand scheme of things.
I think stem cell is probably a more fascinating
Oh, sure.
subject because.
Because a lot of controversy. Anytime there's controversy, people get get
No,
all
it's not
weirded
because
out.
of the controversy, and I understand the controversy. You know, you don't deliberately abort babies to get stem cells. I get that. But I'm talking about what stem cells, what they've been able to find out can be done with them is just incredible.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So what we.
Well, what I was going to say earlier was that that's the whole point I was trying to make before, that the difference between materialism or the natural law versus the human natural law or natural human law is the fact that we have that ability to examine ourselves, to question ourselves, to question everything around us, to try and piece things together. And because we can do that, it appears that God, had a funny bone attack and decided to make us that way so that He could laugh about us chasing all these silly things.
Yeah, it is interesting. Okay, so it started this whole thing with the two questions that C.S. Lewis stated were his objectives. So I think I know the answer, but his first point is that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it.
Yeah, I think we call it conscience.
But it doesn't matter where you are at in the world. Humans have this sense of what is truly right and wrong. Now, I have yet to find a list of, here are the human behavior right and wrongs of the world. You know what I mean? I don't know if there's a list out there.
Well, the list
It's
would
in the
be
Bible.
endless. The list would be endless.
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about the world, you're talking about sociology, you're talking about many different parts of the world
Mhm.
where their world, their little world or big world revolves around certain customs, certain things that group of people believe in, which their neighbors might not believe in, which U.S. citizens might not believe in, but
That's the difference between the natural law of human behavior and
and
social
that's probably
custom.
tons and tons of countries
Yep.
where And we just don't know all of that because we don't know all the groups.
Well, the exception might be, there's a particular personality trait that doesn't have remorse, and I've forgotten what that's called. But they do things without any fear of retribution or caring about it. That's the exception to the rule, I would suspect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not smart enough to talk about that one.
I'm not either, but I know that they exist.
Yeah, yeah. There are. I mean, there's going to be. I can't even go down that line.
And I maybe shouldn't have brought it up.
No, it's all right. So now you get the other one, is that we know that we should behave in a certain way, but we don't. I mean, if that's not the most biblical thing in the world, because when you think about, trying to understand the sin nature and what this sin nature has done, well, the sin nature that we have, basically, God, you're talking about, sense of humor. Nice squirrel. Sorry. So you talk about this sense of humor. He built into his creation, us, this sense of this is what's right and this is what's wrong, good and evil. And what happened is when they disobeyed, both Adam and Eve disobeyed, they now had knowledge of right and wrong. But the sin made them have that free choice. So now there's this fight going on. All right? Because I know what's right and wrong, because that's what happened. I ate from the fruit of the tree, whatever kind of tree it was, apple tree, pear tree, I don't know what kind of tree it was. Now I know what right and wrong is. I know what good and evil is. But because of sin, because I disobeyed, now I can't do right all the time and I do wrong because I have free will. It's the whole thing in a nutshell. And here's the thing. What Lewis is trying to get to in this first set of talks is you got to recognize that you know what right and wrong is. And you can't do what you want to do.
And boy, Paul talks about that.
That's the whole,
Is it possible?
And if anyone should be able to get it right, who had a direct, immediate conversion with the Lord Jesus Christ, it's Paul. But
he can't.
Still
Yeah.
struggle with
Or
it.
is it possible that the law of human nature, the right and wrong, is so difficult to follow that we don't necessarily deliberately break it, we just don't have the wherewithal or the strength to keep from breaking it?
We are not righteous.
Well, we're not righteous, but we're also pretty lackadaisical.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation in eternity. Like,
But
what?
at least he has that capability, that ability, because we should at some point recognize I messed up here, and I need to stop, first go to the Lord and say, I'm really sorry I messed up here. And if I offended someone, go to that person. I mean, we have that ability to do that without feeling like, hanging our head in shame. It's everybody screws up. I mean, that's the way it is. But we can fix it to the best of our
Well, but as that Jerry Root said at one point, I mean, we break that law of nature. I probably broke it multiple times in the last 30 seconds just by thinking about the wrong things, by saying the wrong things, by snapping at someone like he said. I mean, that's all breaking those right and wrong rules. And it's a constant. It's not something that you catch yourself at often enough. Probably need to catch ourselves at it.
Because it's up here, a lot of it, and we have to
Well,
stop
well,
that.
yeah, but we're not caught either. Nobody's catching us at it.
Well,
We catch
actually, we are
ourselves.
being caught.
Yeah.
We do,
We catch ourselves.
Yeah.
Because,
but we don't get punished for it.
well, I know,
Well-
but yesterday, I've been under a lot of things I have to
Sure.
get done.
Sure.
And I have a little neighbor that I bring to church from time to time, and she fell. And I said, "You got to call your doctor." I can't call her doctor. They won't talk to me, okay? You have got to do this. Well, I don't know where my phone is, so I find her phone, I give her her phone. And, and I said, "April, I'm sorry, but I can't do this for you." And when I left, I felt so bad because I felt like Jesus must feel bad about me,
Yeah.
that I don't do, the obvious, the most common sense thing sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, but we do tend to legislate the ability to help people out of the equation, you know. You're right. I
What
mean,
is her name? Did you-
April.
April?
But she finally, yesterday, got an appointment and went,
Good.
had one of the other neighbors take her.
Good for her.
But I had told her I would take her. She had to call me though when she would get dressed and be ready.
And be ready, yeah.
And so she goes, our other neighbor's gonna take me. I said, well, great. I just want you to go because you need to find
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So she had fallen and hit her head really badly. And
Which is not a good thing.
no, but she had a sinus infection that caused all this dizziness.
That caused her to fall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think about things as simple as just, driving down the road. How many times do you have less than a pleasant thing to say about your fellow driver? You know,
Chris didn't say the word.
that violates,
On the way here tonight, it was on my bumper, and I was turning, and so I see, well,
Now I know why God won't give me a car, or point me in the direction of a vehicle, because He knows what's going to happen if I get back out on the road.
I used to put little stickers, cross
Oh,
stickers, and
never
I
put a
don't
sticker
don't
on.
do that anymore. Okay, so how to wrap this all up, and I'm giving all credit to the sermon that I heard this morning because I'm going to steal it and apply it to today. How do we? Okay, so his whole point was we know that there's a behavior that we should have, and we can't do it. What's the answer? And this sort of leads us into this. Jesus basically,
Okay, are you in John?
and John, 15.
15.
Basically, in the upper room, hours before he's going to be taken, he basically says that, I'm the way, I'm the truth, the life. But where it says is, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and I'll do it for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit. So prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I also love you. Abide in my love. All right, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that you may have, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be fulfilled.
What chapter?
15.
15.
John
So
15,
you get this idea that
John 15.
we know that we're supposed to act this way, yet we can't. And the answer is abide in Christ.
What did you say abide meant?
Remain in, be in.
Rest in.
Yeah.
Cease striving and just.
Oh gosh, it's so small. I was going to do a study. Let me see where it goes. Oh yeah, you can't see that. Forget it. I was going to give you the Greek word, but I can't do it on this screen. But anyways, you get the idea. This is the answer. This is where we first can't abide in Christ until we realize that we need Christ. If we're in our own pride, we don't need anybody. If we just believe, that we came from, the sludge of the pond and primordial sludge.
No, we did not come from.
But if we
primordial
did, then it's survival of the fittest, because that is, that's human nature according to, the people that don't believe in God. But this idea is, we know what's right and wrong,
We still don't do it.
and we still don't do it. That's why God sent his son, because he loved his son, and his son loves us. If we abide in his son's love, we are abiding in the Father's love.
If I could just respond to her question real quick.
Sure.
I have the
Oh, you got-
NASB study guide. Abiding in Christ means, 1, believing he is God's son, 1 John 4:15, 2, receiving him as Savior and Lord, John 1:12, 3, doing what God says, 1 John 3:24, continuing to believe the gospel, 1 John 2:24. I love that they give us verses here. And relating in love to the community of believers, Christ's body, John 5:12.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
There you go.
I love study Bibles for that.
All right, that's it.
Oh,
That's it. So next week's virtual. I can tell you this. I can't remember if it's the next week. You might want to look at the schedule and read ahead, because I think we have like 1 week where there's a lot of chapters. But this
Yeah, we
whole
do.
there's this whole book you can read in 2 hours. We can listen.
No,
You can
we-
listen to in 2 hours.
Oh, okay, yeah.
so you
Can you
want
understand
to
it in 2 hours?
Oh no! Yeah.
The one on July the 11th.
Is that the one? It's the one. It's the one after July 4th. All righty. Let me.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh yeah.
Chris, you wanna grab